President Obama's Theology, the theology of President Obama's Christian theocracy. Part 13, the doctrine of sin, salvation, the church, and eschatology in Black liberation theology. Well, I know these have been somewhat of a longer session than normal. Although as a preacher, I'm not sure that there's anything normal in a short session when you're letting a preacher speak. But what I hope is you're beginning to see and understand this kind of theology. It differs from historic Christianity. This is not the theology of Protestantism or of even historic Catholicism. This is a theology that differs from us because it is so blended with a socialistic philosophy. And its ultimate goals and precepts are all designed around that socialistic mentality that we often don't understand how we are being affected because it has been wrapped in a beautiful little package that has much Christian terminology. But do not be deceived by the terminology. It doesn't mean what you think it means. Well, let us continue because we're trying to bring this eventually to a conclusion in our series. The doctrine of sin and salvation. In James Cone's view, sin is, he says, quote, a condition of human existence in which man denies the essence of God's liberating activity as revealed in Jesus Christ. Man's existence in his proper understanding of how God wants to liberate man and how he's expressed that through Jesus Christ. In this view, sin is anything that is contrary to the oppressed community or its liberation. Salvation for Cone has to do primarily with earthly realities, not heavenly hopes. Cone writes, and I quote, "To see the salvation of God is to see this people, that is blacks, rise up against their oppressors, demanding that justice become a reality now and not tomorrow." Even though Cone often speaks of Jesus as the liberator, in practical terms, he emphasizes the human work of self-liberation among blacks and downplays the concept of divine help. The real help is people helping themselves. That's the divine work. That's where God is in their presence. And so you have more of a individualized work of salvation rather than an external or that transitional salvation that comes from God above and beyond our realm of existence. So there is no supernatural salvation being involved here. It is within the history and context of being liberated. Cone also speaks of the doctrine of the church in Black liberation theology. He believes the Black church has played an instrumental role in the religious and social life of Black America. He says the Black church was the creation of a Black people, and I quote, "whose daily existence was an encounter with the overwhelming and brutalizing reality of white power. For the slave, it was the sole source of identity and the sense of community. The Black church became the only sphere of Black experience that was free of white power," unquote. Still, Cone believed that since the days of slavery, the Black church has largely capitulated to the demands of the white racist society. He argues that in order to survive, the Black churches have given up their freedom and dignity. After the Civil War, Black churches became passive in their struggle for civil rights and freedom, while currying favors were doing so from the white establishment. This condition, Cone says, has persisted up to the present day, rendering the Black church, quote, "the lifeless pawn of the status quo," unquote. Only faithfulness to the, quote, pre-Civil War Black church tradition will, he says, issue an exclusive identification with Black power, says Cone. Thus, he maintains that a continued emphasis on Black power is, quote, "the only hope of the Black church in America," unquote. Though Black power as a movement faded after the 1960s, the primary emphasis of the movement, the dignity, the freedom, the self-determination of the black people, has continued in Cone's theological writings. But it has been revived today and is once again taking a prominent role in the black community. And this, he said, is the emphasis that's been missing in many black churches. And the black churches need to embrace black power again. Well, the doctrine of eschatology and black liberation theology, Cone himself rejects what he terms the white lie, that Christianity is primarily concerned with the life in the next world. And I quote, "If eschatology means that one believes that God is totally uninvolved in the suffering of man because he is preparing them for another world, then black theology is not eschatological. Black theology has hope for this life." Unquote. Cone asks, what good is there in golden crowns, slippers, and white robes? Quote, "If it means that we have to turn our backs on the pain and the suffering of our own children, unless the future can become present, thereby focusing us to make changes in this world, what significance could eschatology have for black people who believe that their self-determination must become a reality now?" It's not the future life that black theology has its sights set upon. It's the here, it's the now. Theology that doesn't change, in their estimation, is a theology that simply cannot perform what God's will is. And that's liberation. Thus, Cone says black liberation theology has no interest in the hereafter. They're interested in the here and now. What can your theology do to relieve our pain and suffering? To release us from bondage, oppression, poverty, and our children? That's his view of sin and salvation, of the church and eschatology. That's the theology of President Obama. That's the theology. That is the essence of the preaching that he has listened to for over 20 years.